Welcome back to Global Media Network, LLC. Our motto is and always will be educate, enlighten, entertain. And today, with hosts Lisa Skinner and Betsy Wurzel and Lillian Caldwell, we will be discussing Alzheimer's and dementia because it's national, or it was National Alzheimer's Month. However, since Alzheimer, once it's there, remains, we decided to throw in some extra programs about Alzheimer's to help those caregivers. And it doesn't really matter how old you are anymore. Alzheimer's seems to strike whether you're in your 40s or in your 80s. So we will now start with Betsy Wurzel. She did a year's long program on caregiving for Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson. So we will begin with Betsy Wurzel. Good afternoon, Betsy.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. The last day, can't believe, of June, Brain Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month. And I want to show you all a picture of my husband. So you can see that. That's my husband. That was my husband, Matthew Sloan, who was diagnosed at the age of 56 with early onset Alzheimer's. Early onset Alzheimer's is before the age of 65. Looking back, Matt was 54, probably when he started. It's a shame to say that Matt's family on his mother's side had Alzheimer's. So when he started showing symptoms and signs, I suspected Alzheimer's. What's a real shame is that it's a battle. It was for me, my experience from getting diagnosis to proper end-of-life care. Now, I might get verklempt doing the speaking because it's so close to my heart. It should not be a battle from beginning to end. We shouldn't have to beg for people to listen. We shouldn't have to beg for help, but we do. And when Matt was starting to show signs, his employer noticed. Matt was very, very fortunate that his employer liked him. He was there for 14 years, and they didn't fire him for making mistakes. They had a meeting. I was in the meeting. It was the first time in company history they had a spouse sit in on a disability hearing. They knew Matt couldn't remember. And Matt didn't even have a clue. He thought that the person from Human Resources just came down to ask how he was doing. Interesting that the company doctor, who never saw a test result, suspected dementia. She was hoping it would be the type that's reversible due to a vitamin deficiency or thyroid deficiency, but unfortunately, it wasn't. What we were told was Matt was too young. I even, when I took Matt to neuropsychologist, she said, Matt was non-compliant. You can't possibly be that bad. Now, folks, I have interviewed people and chatting with Betsy. And before that, I was on Jeannie White's show. I have heard this over and over again, where they blame the patient. Can you imagine that? You're going for help and they blame you. You're not trying hard enough. You're non-compliant. So I told Matt to cooperate. And so when she said he was non-compliant, I yelled at him. And he said, Betsy, I was compliant. I could not remember what she showed me. Now, 13 years ago, folks, I didn't know back then what I know now, because I would have chewed her out. And they don't believe the person. Matt's primary doctor, when I first started to see signs, I told him, and he blew me off until he got the letter from the company doctor and called me up and said, blank, blank, Betsy, what's going on? I said, I told you Matt's having memory problems. My suggestion is go to another doctor, keep going until you get peace of mind. Bear in mind, in 2010, there wasn't the information back then that there is now about early onset Alzheimer's. I can only hope that doctors are better at diagnosing. I could only hope that they are helping people. I know Matt's primary is now pre-screening. We're doing the clock. That they started, I think, in 2018. And I said to the doctor, a little too late for Matt. And of course, he rolled his eyes and said, "Oh, Betsy, there's nothing I could do for Matt anyway." I said, "Well, you could have listened to us, could have believed me. And all I can recommend is you have to be an advocate. You have to educate yourself on your loved one's diagnosis. It's very important to know what to expect with your diagnosis, your loved one's diagnosis, side effects and medications, and report the side effects. But you have to know what you're talking about when you talk to a doctor." I will give you a short instance. Matt's Exelon patch was increased, and he was okay for a couple of days. And then this is when he was able to walk by himself. He fell. He said he felt like he was drunk, and he fell. Thankfully, he wasn't hurt. I called the doctor up, and I said, "Please put Matt back on the other dosage." Matt had complications. He felt like he was drunk, and he fell. And I know that difficulty with gait, which is walking balance, is a side effect. And the doctor tried to tell me, "No, it's not." I said, "Oh, yes, it is. Go look it up in your PDR." I had to tell the doctor to go look it up. I said, "Put him back on his dosage." Folks, I never had a big mouth until actually starting with Josh, but really Matt's diagnosis, his battle brought out this advocate in me that I guess really didn't know it was there. And I went into my car and I started to do videos showing Matt's picture, saying, "This is the new face of Alzheimer's. You can get it early. You have any memory problems, concerns, please talk to your primary care doctor. They won't listen to you. Go to someone else. And until you get peace of mind about it," excuse my voice. And that's how I got discovered by Jeannie White, who's the station manager at Pastoral Talk Radio. And that's how I started at Pastoral Talk Radio. I started a Jeannie White show that she was having and getting caregivers to talk. And we learn by stories and our experience. And I share my experience and that story to help others. Now, I really want to suggest you need to plan. You need to go get your power of attorney. You need to get power of finances immediately. Actually, everyone should have that from 18. Start pre-planning. Pre-plan the funeral. I'm not saying that to be morbid. I'm being realistic. I pre-planned the funeral. I pre-planned paying off the cemetery. And I'm glad I did that. I felt guilty about doing it. I shouldn't have, but I'm glad I did it. You need to pre-plan. You don't want to be facing that when your loved one dies. Because the fact is, folks, the diagnosis is terminal. But what you do from diagnosis to your end of life is different for everyone. Live your life. Go out and kick Alzheimer's butt by enjoying life. Celebrate holidays. Doesn't matter if your loved one remembers or not. I celebrated everything with Matt. He didn't remember. And don't get insulted. Don't take it personal when they don't remember your birthday. For goodness sake, Matt didn't even know his own birthday. I wasn't insulted. And if you have children, whether they're young or teenage or adult, let them vent to you about it. Let them talk to you about it. Josh, who's on the autistic spectrum, understood more about Alzheimer's than so-called normal people. He was great with his dad. And he would vent to me, "Oh, I hate Alzheimer's. I hate changing daddy's diaper." I do too, Josh. Because when you close down that communication, they'll go somewhere else. And I mean, we could do a whole nother show on grieving, but you start grieving from time of diagnosis with every skill lost till the end of life. But don't sit there and wait to die. Go out and enjoy life. Do as much as you can while you can, because it'll get to a point where you can't go out with your loved one. Thankfully for Josh, who helped me, he was able to help Matt in the bathroom. But then it got to a point where Matt could not go to the mall. But that was really near the end of his life where he couldn't go out. So I'm grateful that he was able to go out and enjoy himself till almost the end. And I want to recommend get someone to help you go through the hospice process. Have someone either be a death doula that's there to support you, and insurance doesn't cover death doulas. To a geriatric nurse, planner. Sometimes there's dementia consultants that can help you. I wish I had someone help me navigate the process. I went with the hospital that's in the area that the doctor recommended, and I had the home hospice from hell experience. Shouldn't have been that way, but it was. I had to fight for Matt's end of life care, and you have to advocate. You can dismiss a hospice. You can get another one. It was really too late in Matt's case because he was really in bad shape. Hospice was supposed to be supportive. They're supposed to be supportive. You're supposed to have a good experience. Not supposed to aggravate the living crap out of you, as what was in my case. You have to speak up. Little did they know who they were dealing with. They thought I was this little quiet housewife. No, they soon found out that Betsy has a big mouth. Might be little, but I have a big mouth. And I told that director of hospice exactly how I felt. I made calls to Medicare. I made calls to New Jersey Department of Health. And in my own opinion, my experience, it's sad to say, they don't care how they treat people with dementia or cognitive disabilities. They think they can get away with it. They don't think people will complain. Why do I talk about my experience? Because I want to help other people. I wanted that hospice to know they can't treat people like this and get away with it. They probably got a slap on the wrist, but they have to know. And I told that director of hospice, because she apologized and said someone apparently dropped the ball. And I said, my husband's not a ball. He's a human being. You wouldn't accept this treatment for your husband. I know that. Neither would anyone else on this floor. Do not expect me to accept this treatment. Then they had the nerve to tell me that Matt would be going home. Can you believe that? He's getting intravenous medication. And they had the nerve to tell me they're going to put him on medicine by mouth. I said, no, he won't be going home. And I will refuse his discharge. I will monitor him myself. Social worker said, you can't do that unless the doctor agrees. Does he want to try me? I will call it Medicare so fast. I know my rights, and I have a right to refuse an unsafe discharge. And I went back to the director, and I said, Matt should go home, which I know he's not. I said, so help me, if a nurse doesn't come out, my next call is to your CEO. And don't think I won't do it. And she handed me her card, and she said, you call me 24/7. And it's a shame, really, that we have to advocate so much. And I'm kind of envious in a way of caregivers now, because there's so much information. There wasn't the information available 13 years ago. And I think because of the pandemic, more people came on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and are holding free seminars and webinars, whatever you want to call them. And education is the key, folks. Education, knowledge is power, as they say. There's a difference. With my mother-in-law, who had Alzheimer's back in 2000, I was an LPN. I did not even hear the word Alzheimer's. I didn't know about hallucinations, sundowning. I did not handle it properly. Why? Because I wasn't educated. There was not the education. I contacted the Alzheimer's Association, and they didn't have much information back then. Educate yourself. Know what to expect. I know reading about it, living with it's two different things, but at least you will be prepared. And preparation is so important. You need to prepare so you know how to handle hallucinations. And Lisa Skinner can tell you about that. And speaking of, education, I wish there was shows on that there are now. And I want to put a plug here for Lisa Skinner's show, Truth Lies. What is it, Lisa? I'm going to get confused here.
The Truth Lies in Alzheimer's show.
There you go. Folks, if you're not listening to that, you're missing so much education. I had Lisa on my show. I was on Lisa's show. So much good education that you need to listen to, because I'm telling you, it makes a difference how you handle hallucinations. But time Matt started to hallucinate, I was like an armed soldier. I even taught Josh what to do, and we were able to handle it, because you have to live in their world. They can't live in your world. There's so much to know about safety. How about pre-planning, looking at places for placement in case you have to place your loved one? That's a plan. What are you going to do? God forbid there's an emergency. You have to leave your house. Are you registered with your local police or sheriff's department? That's something else to think about. Thank God I had Matt registered with our local Safe and Sound program, because he got lost one day. They found him in 30 minutes. These are all information that I did not know about, but I found out. And if you want to know resources, Lisa Skinner knows a lot of information. I know a lot of resources. And one of the reasons why I do Chatting with Betsy is to provide resources for people and to help people, because I wish I knew about it when Matt was alive. Matter of fact, we don't even know what's in our own backyard, do we? I interviewed a death doula back in April. She lives the next town over. I live in Island. She's in Colonia. I didn't know about her. I wish I did. I would have hired her. So we don't know. Well, we don't know, right? And you do the best you can with the knowledge that you have at the time. But folks, I am pleading with you and begging you, educate yourself, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you know someone who will have Alzheimer's or some other dementia. 1 in 3 people are diagnosed. And Lisa could tell you more about that, because she's the pro. I don't consider myself an expert. I only know what my experience was with my mother-in-law and with my husband. And my dad also had Alzheimer's, and I helped support my mom, and emotionally, excuse me. And my brother, before he died, had memory problems. Good thing I wasn't his power of attorney. It's a good thing I didn't live down by him, because that neurologist had a stinky attitude, arrogant. I can't believe in 2021 they were still arrogant and ignorant. Oh, that just doesn't happen overnight. Yeah, no kidding. This has been ongoing. But you know what? When people are in denial, it's not any good. Don't be in denial. If you or your loved one are having memory problems, don't put your head in the sand. It's not going to solve anything. Face it. There's help out here. There's resources. And I think that's all I have to say. So thank you very much. And hand over to Lisa.
Thanks, Betsy. Hello, everybody. Listening to Betsy reminds me that what she just shared with us is just one more heartbreaking story that unfortunately I hear way too often. You all know me from this show, Lest We Forget, which of course is a historical presentation about atrocities that have happened throughout history to mankind. But as Betsy mentioned, like Betsy, I also do a show exclusively about living with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia. So if you were not aware of that, let me just share with you real quickly. So I have been counseling families professionally as a behavioral specialist for close to 30 years now. My personal experience dates back almost 50 years when my grandmother started showing signs of some form of dementia. When I went over one day to visit with her, she proceeded to tell me about these birds that lived in her mattress and would come out at night and peck at her face, and about the rats that were invading her home, about the men that were stealing her jewelry and wanted to kill her. And I'm a 16-year-old teenager listening to these unbelievably far-fetched tales. But this was, of course, my grandma. And she was so convincing. And I wanted desperately to believe her. I knew better than to argue or try to correct her, because we were taught in those days that you don't do that to your elders. But trying to wrap my head around birds living in her mattress and coming out while she was sleeping at night and pecking at her face was a lot to take in. So since then, I have had 7 more family members suffer from one of the brain diseases that causes dementia. 5 of those have been blood relatives and 3 have been through marriage. And they have not all been Alzheimer's disease. They've been a variety. We've had vascular dementia, and we've had Huntington's disease. But we wanted to do this show today on lest we forget to honor National Alzheimer's Awareness Month. And of course, as you can tell, this topic is very, very near and dear to our hearts, including Lillian, and she'll tell you her story following mine, because she took care of her husband who suffered from Alzheimer's disease. So the 3 of us have all been struck personally, and then I ended up doing this professionally. So I'm a 2 times best-selling author on the subject. I'm a certified dementia practitioner. I'm a certified dementia caregiver. Certified dementia care trainer. And I've been doing this a really, really long time. And the first thing I want to say is everything that Betsy said to you prior to me coming on is 100% absolutely true. I hear this day in and day out from the families that I interact with about how difficult it is to find resources and to know what to do. And doctors won't really give you a lot of guidance after they tell you that they suspect that your loved one has Alzheimer's disease. And of course, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but it's their best guess, because as of today, there is no definitive test for determining whether or not somebody has Alzheimer's disease until they're already passed on and it's confirmed through an autopsy. So basically, they have to go through what's called a process of elimination and first figure out what it's not, and then kind of narrow it down to, oh, well, this looks like Alzheimer's, walks like Alzheimer's, talks like Alzheimer's, maybe this is Alzheimer's. But then again, it's not foolproof, because people also suffer from what we call mixed dementia, where they can suffer from one or more different types of brain diseases that cause dementia at the same time. And there are over 100 brain diseases that cause dementia. So somebody could theoretically be living with Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia, or Lewy body dementia, or frontotemporal lobe dementia simultaneously. So that makes the whole situation even more difficult. So everything that Betsy told you that she experienced happens to too many families. And I agree with what she said, that it really has been more recently that people are now starting to talk about it more. But prior to the pandemic, it was still considered a shameful thing to talk about in your family. That's what happened in my family. My mother was aware that my grandmother was suffering from what they called back then senile dementia. The word Alzheimer's disease was never even spoken. And I asked her why she didn't tell me after I had to learn about the birds and the rats and the bad men. And she basically just looked at me and said, we don't talk about that. And that's been the case for almost 50 years. But people, this is the proverbial elephant in the room, Alzheimer's disease. It's larger than life. It's staring you right in the face. It is impacting so many families today, and it's not going away anytime soon. So we have to talk about it. We have to, like Betsy told you, be prepared for how it's going to impact your life if it strikes you. The World Health Organization, the National Institutes on Aging, and the Alzheimer's Association have projected independently that if we don't find a cure or a treatment by the year 2050, which is only 22 years away, it's right around our corners, the number of people who will develop Alzheimer's disease in that short 22 years is going to triple from the number of people who suffer from it today. And guess what? As a society, we are absolutely not prepared, and we'll all experience what Betsy just described if we don't educate ourselves more about this disease and learn how to live with it. And the good news is you can live well with it. We know so much about how to strategically care for people today that they didn't know 13 years ago when Betsy was going through this with her husband. They didn't know when Lillian was going through this with her husband. But for decades and decades and decades, we have been, through trial and error, figuring out what works best, what doesn't work at all. So we, as loved ones, family members, and caregivers, are able to provide our loved ones with the best quality of life possible. And trust me, I've seen it firsthand, just miracles. And it's all in how you approach the disease. And the thing that I've learned in the years that I've been involved in this industry is the first important thing to do, as Betsy, and I totally agree with her recommendation, is learn all you can about the disease. So you can be proactive and not be put in a position where you'll be reactive like most people have had to be. This is a very strange disease. It's very complicated. Because there are over 100 brain diseases that cause dementia, you're not really sure which brain disease you're dealing with. And again, you can be dealing with multiple brain diseases at the same time. A lot of the symptomology with this disease is similar no matter what type of brain disease you have. They vary a little bit. So, for example, the hallmark of Alzheimer's disease is that it attacks first the short-term memory. But with that in mind, people are under the misconception that if you have Alzheimer's disease, really it's your short-term memory and that's impacted and you're confused. That's not true at all. That is a myth. It is so much more complicated than that. So you need to be prepared for hearing stories about birds living in your loved one's mattress and rats running around the house ready to invade and suspicious behavior and paranoid behavior. This is all part of the disease. I've had so many family members tell me, yeah, my mother is suffering from Alzheimer's disease, but on top of that, she's also going crazy. No, they're not going crazy. This is not mental illness. This is a brain disease, and there's a huge difference between mental illness and brain disease. So everything that you are witnessing with the behaviors and the personality changes and the outbursts and the anger and all of the components that go along with this disease, this is the disease. And you need to understand that this is all part of the disease. So when these things occur, you'll recognize them. And then even more importantly, know the best practice available for responding and reacting to those behaviors. And I need to make you aware of this as well. Not every strategy works for every single situation every single time. As Betsy's nodding her head saying, oh, you've got that right. So the best approach is to learn as much as you can about the best practices. Arm yourself with an arsenal of tools in your toolbox. So when these situations arise, and trust me, they're like a California earthquake. They come at you unexpectedly with no notice at all. You will be able to pull a tool out of your toolbox and try it to see if it diffuses the situation. If it works, great. But that doesn't mean it's going to work this next time when that exact situation arises. So be prepared to try something else. And if I can't give you any more advice than what I'm telling you now, learn as much as you can about what this disease does to your loved one, the things that you want to recognize and look for, and then the best approaches, because all three of us have personally experienced that the instinctive reactions that we just automatically want to show a response to a lot of these behaviors is actually counterintuitive to the way we instinctively want to react. So there's a lot of false beliefs that go on with Alzheimer's disease, like believing birds are living in your mattress, or that your husband is still alive, but he passed away 6 years ago. That's very common with Alzheimer's disease. And our gut reaction, our instinctive response to that would be to try to correct your loved one, to fix them. You don't want to see them confused like this. That's probably the worst thing you can do, is to try to steer them back into your reality, into your world. What we teach is to join theirs. And I can tell you story after story after story. And we used to, many moons ago, practice what is called reality orientation therapy, which is exactly that if somebody's having a false belief, you do correct them. You do try to bring them back into your reality. Well, guess what? That didn't work at all. It caused way more problems than anybody ever thought it would. So the new ideology and the new strategy is to do what we call join their reality and go along with their false belief, because nothing anybody can say or do can change that belief while they're having it. But it's pretty common that they'll snap out of it at some point and come back to the current reality. And that's a completely new explanation that I can offer people of why that happens with this disease. But just be prepared for it, as Betsy said, because these are all part of the disease and they're not separate. So the more you understand, the more tools you have in your toolkit, you can be proactive and diffuse these situations. And that is going to provide a much higher quality relationship for everybody involved if you're able to do that. And like Betsy said, and I couldn't agree more, It takes knowledge. Knowledge will become your power to help you keep your sanity while going through this very heartbreaking disease. So thank you for listening. I hope this has been helpful, what Betsy and I have shared with you, and I hope we have increased your awareness about this disease. I just want to say something very positive that I just read a couple days ago that I find to be very hopeful and encouraging. Is I read a statement from the Alzheimer's Association saying that the year 2023 has been a record year for donations for Alzheimer's research. And they have been saying for decades, I've been involved with the Alzheimer's Association for decades. And one of the things that I have consistently heard from them is the reason why there have been so many advancements in cancer treatments is because of the money for research that has been poured into cancer research. And that was important. We absolutely needed it. And the result of that is so many more people today are surviving cancer. But this is one of the reasons why we have still not yet come up with a treatment or a cure for Alzheimer's disease. We're left way behind in the dust from cancer research because of the money, the lack of money being donated. Well, guess what? That's all changing. Every year for the last 18 years, the Alzheimer's Association has told us now that the amount of money every year is increasing in donations. So that personally gives me so much hope that we are on the right track to discovering a cure or a treatment even that can ward off the amount of people who are projected to develop this disease in the next 22 years. So that just gives me so much hope, and I wanted to share that with everybody. I couldn't be better news to me. So that said, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Lillian and let her share with you her personal tribute to National Alzheimer's Awareness Month. Thanks so much.
One of the things that people need to recognize, and that includes men and women who may have to caregive for their spouses, is to remember this. Being a caregiver is not a one-team sport. There are plenty of organizations and clubs out there to help you. And I'm sure that Lisa and Betsy will agree, if you can get that extra support in caring for your loved one with Alzheimer's, you'll be doing your own self a mental and physical health situation that will not develop into your own downward spiral. I know in Pennsylvania, they have several numbers you can call or contact the Pennsylvania government, and they provide services for those seniors who are wrestling with Alzheimer's and for getting the adequate care that they need, either through assisted nursing or help in terms of food, clothing, and insurance. Because even though Alzheimer's affects the mind, it also affects you as the breadwinner should you still be working. And that's something you need to keep in mind. Or if you're grandparents and you're taking care of your children, because your own children are incapable or they don't want the responsibility of bringing up their own kids. So I would suggest, in whatever state of the union, you contact them and find out what kind of services that they provide so you can take advantage of them. Now, I live in a senior independent community, and they have groups to help caregivers come in sit down and for an hour talk about things that go wrong, things that they need help with, and they are there to provide you with the information, and also understand that there are people there who recognize what you're going through, and these may be some things that you can learn from them. I remember when my husband Barry was first diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and I put out a call for help on LinkedIn, and I was aghast at a lot of the feedback from men who told me, I don't even want to talk about it. I had to take care of my mother, and she had Alzheimer's. She should have died instead. And I think those kind of reactions are from men because women are brought up to be caregivers. We're expected to take care of anybody in the family who gets sick, especially those with Alzheimer's, cancer, dementia, Parkinson's. My dad had Parkinson's. He got it when I was 16. My mother diagnosed him because her dad was a doctor and she knew what to look for. The doctor didn't have a clue. And she had to tell the doctor what his symptoms were. And she was the one who say, oh, I understand there's an experimental program with L-DOPA. Perhaps you need to get him on that. So it's not unusual for a family member, especially one who's been married to somebody who practices medicine, to see the symptoms way before the doctor becomes clued in. I complained for 3 years to our doctor that something was wrong with my husband, that he kept on forgetting things and he hallucinated. We spent more time waiting around on street corners for phantom people to show up than I cared to count. The thing that saved me was I had interviewed a lady who wrote a book about Alzheimer's. And I was so impressed by her and her qualifications that I called up her New York office and said, this is what the doctor said. And she says, bring him into the city and I will put him through full diagnostic testing. It took 2 days and he was on stage 3, stage 4 of Alzheimer's. And yes, there are stages of Alzheimer's. Who knew it can get worse? But it can if you don't have the right treatment for your loved one. I learned along the way that loud noises affect some of them. My husband could not stand vacuum cleaners, fans, or people talking loudly. It scared him. Now, please understand that my husband had a doctorate from Harvard in organic chemistry. And his mother had Alzheimer's, and her mother before her, and her mother before it. And for the first 2 years, he went around cursing God and me for having it. My husband also was very similar to a Clark Kent, a very mild man. Well, this mild man had put his fist through the wall because he was angry that he couldn't turn on the shower. So just because your husband or wife may be a very nice person, when they get Alzheimer's, they have no control over what their brain is telling them to do. So the first thing that you'll be asked is, did your husband or wife hit you? Did they pummel you with your fists? Did they take something and strike you with it? Because that is part of their behavior. The other thing you need to learn is, as both Betsy and Lisa says, you cannot take anything that they say personally, or better yet, how they act. My best friend called me and she said, your husband kissed me on the lips and asked if he could move in with me. And I said, what did you tell him? And she said, no, I don't think that's doable. And I said, good, thank you very much. And she was just letting me know. And then later said, weren't you angry? And I said, why? He wasn't in his right mind. And literally, he isn't in his right mind. So you have to understand that. And you also have to explain to your children and your nieces and nephews and your grandchildren that making the sign of the cross is not necessary, because Alzheimer's is not a virus like the flu or the common cold or even like COVID. It doesn't jump from person to person if they touch you. But they also have no control over their body movements. And what you have to do is reassure them that it's okay. So if they stumble and fall, picking up dead weight is difficult, but I found the best way is putting your arms underneath their armpits and helping them stand up. If they fall flat on the floor, get somebody to help you lift them, because you will not be able to lift them yourself. Also, with books, they don't remember how to read, so they may spend 4 hours looking at one page in the book. That's fine. They're not hurting you. They're not hurting themselves, and they're quiet. And yes, they're keeping themselves amused. Barry used to sit in front of the TV set with it off. And yet from his demeanor, you would think he was watching a football game. So you have to understand that that is the world they inhabit, and that is the type of world you need to understand. There is a lot of information on Google, folks. Look it up. There's all types of content in there that will tell you precisely what you need to know. But the most important thing is, unlike with Betsy or even with me, you are not alone. Alzheimer outranks cancer now as the #1 disease in the world. And they have trouble in Europe just as much as we have trouble here in the United States. The other thing you may want to consider is I got one of those lifeline transmitters for Barry to wear, because Barry liked to walk, and he would just walk right out the door and disappear for hours. And like I said, since I live in a senior community, somebody would bring him back. But I don't look at it as a big brother type of maneuver. There are lots of times he would disappear for 2 or 3 hours and we could track him and bring him home. Unlike some of the earlier news stories about people with Alzheimer's wandering away and nobody knew where to look for them, because they'll walk out in the middle of traffic. They don't see anything. They can walk into a lake or a canal if you're living down in Houston, Texas, for example. They don't have any memory of doing anything. So you have to remember this. And one of the biggest complaints, if they do come in for a couple of minutes from their Alzheimer's, my husband said to me 4 days before he died, I have no quality of life. Let me die. So make sure you have a living will. And also make sure that you know what to do when your husband or your wife or your other loved one dies, because there's a lot of steps that need to be taken, and you have to be prepared for this. I'll tell you one thing. It'll cost you $50 for each death certificate that you will need to send off to any credit card company your spouse or uncle or aunt or whoever in your life has a credit card with. And you also will need it for when you make plans to bury or cremate or whatever you choose to do with the body. And of course, the police have to be called if they die at home. You need to call them and let them know. So all I can say is that caregiving for someone who has Alzheimer's will try your fortitude, but be smart about it and make arrangements for you to get away, or at least in a quiet room where you can hear yourself think and you can recollect yourself, because it's very difficult, or I'll admit, for me, I found it very difficult not to get upset or not to get angry or not to want to start crying. But you can't do that and take care of the person you're trying to make a better life for, even though they're not aware of that. So before we say and bid everyone adieu, I would like Lisa Skinner and Betsy to please provide their email. So if anybody who has additional questions about Alzheimer's can contact them.
You can reach me at dementia whisperer and then the number 1 at gmail.com.
Betsy?
My email is Sloan, SLOAN, Betsy, BETSY31 at gmail.com. Forgot to mention before, but if anyone's looking for a support group, I have one on Facebook, #Kick Alzheimer's Ass Movement. Everyone's welcome to join. Thank you.
Hey, Lillian, do we know what we rounded up our transgender series, I think, last week. Do we know what our new topic's going to be starting next Friday?
We'll probably do another one on Alzheimer's where people want to talk, and we'll talk about handling grief. And also probably how to handle younger kids who see their parents going through this. I know that my son grew up with his grandfather having Parkinson's, and he grew up anyway very quickly, and he was very sophisticated, but it also made him a more empathetic person, because he realized not everyone is healthy all the time. So how do you relate to a grandfather who drives like this and walks unsteadily around, and his hands are shaking so badly and he's stuttering? And yet I was saying my son had a very close relationship with his grandfather with all these faults. And I think it's because A, it was the way I handle it, but B, more importantly, he recognized that something was wrong with dad. Mommy didn't make a big deal of it. She just worked with him and tried to provide for him for the things he needed. And I think that when you're setting yourself up as a role model for a child, especially with somebody who has a mental, emotional, or a physical handicap, you have to be very careful how you handle it. Because a child he doesn't know anything. So anything he does learn, he's going to be coming from the parent. So when he meets a child in a wheelchair, he's not going to taunt the child in the wheelchair. Or if he meets somebody wearing glasses, they're not going to say 4 eyes. Or if he meets somebody using a crutch or missing a leg, he's not going to make a derogatory comment about it, because he's been taught something else. And I think that's important to discuss. Now, one other thing. On September 19th, Tuesday at 2:00, our host, Lisa Skinner, will be presenting one of 11 courses based on her best-selling book, Truth, Lies, and Alzheimer's, of how to deal with the disease and everything that implies. And we will be setting up a landing page where you can come and sign up, and we will provide you with additional information. If you're interested, you can text us at 484-364-1032. Leave your name and email address, and Lisa Skinner or Lillian Caldwell will answer you with the information of where you can sign up. So we want to thank everybody for joining us on Lest We Forget -historical, meaning that we talk about situations that have happened in history repeatedly. Some of them are atrocities, but none of them have ever been solved. And we decided it is our job to fix it once and for all, instead of having the atrocities continue forever. You can find us at youtube.com/PWR network _PW Talk Radio, Facebook.com/Passionate World Talk Radio, and Facebook.com/Lest We Forget -historical. If you can't find it directly, again, text us and we will provide you with the link to get there. So, and also on our blog at passionateworldtalkradio.com. So thank you all very much for listening. Happy 4th of July. Drive safely, and we'll see you next week.